What's up guys, and welcome to the channel. On this episode we're going to be doing long tube headers and full exhaust on our 69 Mustang Mach 1 project. This is a big block, so the engine really needs to breathe well. So these stock manifolds that we just pulled out of the car are obviously not going to cut it. As you can see from the primaries, they're just really choking out the engine's performance. We got our exhaust primaries all set here from Stainless Brothers. We're going with their oval mufflers. We're going to do some proper merge collectors that are slip fit, and going to run the rest of the exhaust system with a Stainless Brothers 304 stainless steel. We're going to make an X pipe as well, so we're going to have these 245s that are actually going to kind of come together and make a really nice sound for the exhaust. But first thing we have to do is start knocking out these headers. The space in the engine bay is really tight, so let's go over there and take a look. Mike is elbows deep at this engine bay. What do we got going on right now with this fancy thing right there in the middle of the engine?
We decided to remove the old style carburetor system, and we went ahead and installed this Holley Sniper EFI kit.
We went ahead and put this fuel injection system on, and while doing that we decided that the exhaust is not really up to par for the add-ons that we're doing up top. So whenever you're doing a build like this, sometimes it kind of snowballs. One will affect the other. So with the electronic fuel injection, the engine's going to be really efficient. You need an exhaust that's going to be efficient as well. I get this thing up in the air and you get to see how much room you have in a big block in an old Ford Mustang like this and what we have to deal with. When you have a big block, you have big block problems. There's probably about 3 or 4 inches gap there. So that front primary is going to be pretty tough to get to. On the steering side, the space is even tighter. I'm going to take advantage of this gap I have from the motor mount and stack them on top of each other. And then the rear two are probably just going to hug the block and come straight down. Collector's going to be about back here so that we can resume the exhaust out, and we're going to try to tuck it as tight as we can under the bottom of the car, because the worst thing in the world is going over a speed bump or something and you hear a scrape of your freshly welded exhaust system. So since space is so tight inside the engine bay, what we're going to do is we're going to tack weld our 90s to the flange to get us started. From there we can kind of get a better idea as to how we're going to run our primaries down by the starter and clear the motor mount and the firewall. Alright guys, so the suspension is in, steering box is in, and we have our starter. It's crucial you have all these components in place when you're doing headers like this, just so you know where you gotta jog your primaries around. On the passenger side, I went ahead and got the flange mounts in with some 90s, and I just positioned them, as you can see, on a 45-degree angle, aiming back towards this frame rail. If I can tuck this guy up and hug this primary right here, it'll give me enough room to be able to get that first one underneath it. I'm piecing it together with what's called timing marks. And you just put 2 lines across your seam. And that tells you exactly where you want to go over your bench to weld. And then I have just enough room to be able to get that 2-inch primary underneath this guy. Well, we have our first 2 primaries started. This primary here just jogs right underneath and just barely clears the motor mount. Because of that, I have to screw the motor up, get it away from this motor mount, and get it clearanced away from the strut tower so I could slide this header in. Once we get the header in, I'll thread it back down. I'm not gonna bolt it up, I'm just gonna let it sit so then I can just double check the clearance. Since I have to come over the starter, I'm gonna come straight back with the header. So all 4 primaries are gonna come straight back and over. I have this big old collector. Have plenty of room back here to put it pretty much wherever I want it. These 2 primaries are fitting pretty nice. It is tight against the motor mount, so I might have to shave it back just a little bit. All in all, that's probably one of the tightest areas for the header. What I'm hoping to do is to try to get this one connected to the collector, and then I can take the header out and try to build the rest of it on the bench based off a couple measurements for this starter. But that might be wishful thinking. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out right now. I'm gonna rotate these and start running my primaries on the back to be able to get this collector in position. All right, so this last primary is turned up, so now I can go over the bell housing. We cut this one in half, so now this is turned to a 45. So this gives us the ability to be able to go up and over with it, but it had to point down in order to clear the strut tower that's like right here. The slip fit collector, it's similar to like a motorcycle. If you ever seen the little springs on the side of the motorcycle, it actually holds the primaries in. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna separate this into 3 different sections. You can have the front 2 primaries, rear 2 primaries, and then the collector, and it's all gonna be held together with like a bracket system. But what I need to do first, like I mentioned before, is I gotta modify this motor mount. It's got way too much meat on top of it in order to fit this primary by. I've actually seen big block headers before where each one of these primaries are completely separate and all slides together as one unit. I don't want to go that extreme with it. We're just going to go with 2 for now. After hours and hours of calculation, sleeping, and procrastination, we finally got the collector in place. The collector is just about centered between the transmission and the frame rail. Up until this point, it's been pretty difficult, but when you're building headers like this, what you want to do is you want to get your point A and your point B. Usually, and in past videos, when we do headers, we tack the collector in place and then just bolt the flange on and connect the dots. Well, in a big block, in this situation, with it being so tight, we weren't able to do any of that stuff. I literally have had to kind of build these primaries out to a certain point at the same time, so I know they'll all clear each other. Once my collector's in place, now I can start connecting the dots. Now it gets a little bit easier. And then it gets really difficult again when we get back over to the driver's side. But for right now, let's focus on the passenger side. So we've confirmed that these 2 primaries clear the bell housing. It's about down here somewhere. So we have is just a 45 and a 15 degree right here. And this is gonna go from here to here. So right now I'm just gonna measure the distance, cut it straight, tack it all together. Then I'm gonna put this back in the car again to confirm that this rear section of the header is all set. And then we'll start working on the front section. So our starter's back in and our collector is in position. Our 2 front primaries are finally done. As you can see, they tuck up pretty tight against the top side of the bell housing against the engine so that we can make room for these 2 primaries here. The starter has more than enough room on top, so we know we're not going to overheat that or cook it. What we're going to do is run these 2 primaries back right now and try to run them high and be able to make it in these 2 slots right here. This guy's loose, so it just slides right in and out. As you can see, it makes it real easy to be able to take these headers in and out of here. So the front 2 primaries have been a little bit trickier than the rear 2. The rear 2 are a little easier to get to. The front, I've had to unbolt it and bolt it back in several times just to get it to this point. So what I'm going to do now, in order to finish out this 3rd primary, which is going to go to the top of the collector here, I'm going to bolt these 2 halves to the other flange that I haven't messed with yet. This is going to give me the exact spread on if I had like the head on the bench, which I don't. So I'm going to bolt these on, and then I'll be able to connect the dots from here to here on this guy. Our 4th primary up here is just gonna have to jog straight back. So I wanna come from the collector probably and work my way forward. And I'm gonna stop right near the starter so that I can make sure that I can make this connection on the bench, and I'll make some timing marks up on the collector up here. I finally have the 4th primary set. It's gonna go right between the starter jog out on the bell housing here, and in between this mount for the steering linkage. We have our header bolted down to our partial fixture. Now what some people like to do is just clamp the header down to a table and just leave it be. I like to go one step further. You want to fix your 2 positions in space, because when we go to weld all these primaries up, we have to break it all apart. In this situation, it's going to be definitely necessary to weld all the way around all these primaries. So we're going to go ahead and now make a fixture point for this end. Now once we're done welding that all up, Then we'll go in and we're going to not fill this with weld necessarily, but we're going to actually heat these corners up and hammer and dolly them out so that it forms to that oval shape on the head. All right guys, here it is. Passenger side header is done. Instead of getting too far ahead of ourselves, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave this here for now. Keep it as a little motivation piece for me to keep going on this driver's side because this thing's gonna be a nightmare. I know the guys already ordered an oil filter relocation kit. So I'm gonna pull this off, I'm gonna cut this guy down, and I'm gonna modify my motor mount, and then we're gonna start fitting tubes. The first two primaries are in. We got them to the point where they're past the motor mount like we did on the other side. The only thing I forgot was this steering box actually has this pitman arm right here, this guy. And when I steered the car all the way to the left, causing the pitman arm to max out, I came to the conclusion that this is not going to jive. We have a rack and pinion conversion in the mail, but we're going to use the actual existing steering components in order to get our positioning for the rack when it comes in the mail. So for now, we're going to pull this out of the way and continue on with our headers. Fit if I do. O'Doyle rules!
Who rules?
O'Doyle rules!
All right guys, the headers for the Mustang are finally done. We went 2-inch primaries all the way back to a proper merge from burned stainless. This thing should really sing now. Long tube headers for a big block are definitely not easy to do. You can't really see much on the driver's side. There's really not a whole lot of real estate with the big block. But underneath here, you can kind of see how much better everything fits with our steering rack as opposed to the steering box. And now we're gonna be able to run the exhaust out the back of the car. We're gonna do full stainless steel from the headers all the way to the tip with Stainless Brothers mufflers also. So it should give it a really nice deep groan. And I don't think it'll drone too bad because we're gonna go 3-inch with a proper X pipe. So on the next episode, guys, we're gonna be finishing out the exhaust system, buttoning up the suspension and the brakes, and getting this thing over to the dyno, and hopefully we can put down some good numbers. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you guys later.
Clear!